Do you want to know what the fallen are, little one? In a sense, they are angels, but not the angels your mom imagines she prays to. Brass trumpets picnicking in the clouds. In their true essence, they are great swirling engines of wing and blood, fiery eyes that peer around the corners between worlds. Dark, radiant things conjured from fresh battlefields. A Frankenstein's Valkyrie, forever crashing to Midgard. What grief demands their hate, what vast cannibal hunger.
Welcome to the Fallen Cycle Mythos podcast. This is a universe full of secrets, waiting for those brave or foolhardy enough to seek them out. Cycle 1. Tales from When I Had a Face was written and produced by James Curcio, with editing by Brian Johnson. A modern fairy tale about death, loss, and finding redemption in the strangest places for those of us still haunted by the uncertain, occult logic of dreams. The fully illustrated black and white edition of this book is available at Amazon.com. The soundtrack features the work of David Bessel, along with additional contributions credited in the individual episode notes. Support for this project is pivotal. By becoming a patron at patreon.com/mythosmedia, that's MYTHOS media, you enable us to make more content like this and to be able to hire on more freelance artists in future works. Discover more about the transmedia Mythpunk Fallen Cycle universe at fallencycle.com. This podcast contains adult themes and may induce psychosis. And now, this week's episode. Season 2, Episode 6, The Passage. Would you get your old Gran some water? Of course, Aita said. But can't you tell me a little bit more tonight? You stopped right when it was getting good. Was it now? Gran asked. I'd say I stopped when it was just getting bad. She put a finger to Aita's nose, as if to tweak it. But you didn't have to live through it. Stories are always different on the other side. Please, Aita pleaded. Very well, Gran said. Fetch my water and my medicine, and I will continue.
The sun remained eclipsed behind an inexplicable semi-darkness. In this twilight, cinders rained down from above and peppered the ground as if to season it for a last meal before the end of time. We still thought we were outrunning the battle, that it would soon be lost behind us, and all might return to normal. Under these oppressive conditions, we made our way towards Sevgorod, the Chernayan capital. Also known as the City in the Clouds, it had grown up around a forge established centuries ago in the bowl of a long-slumbering volcano. True to its name, clouds trickled from the rim of that stone bowl, curling around the lip like a liquid, tumbling down its steep sides into a vague, gray haze. Through the murky vapor, we could make out Sevgorod. From this distance, it appeared labyrinthine, but less claustrophobic than New Babylon. Above ground, it was a city constructed of stone, built to weather the ages by the enslaved enemies of the empire. Underneath it, I had learned, lay the mines and forges that had helped to build that empire, and also the thousand bones of those upon whose thankless labor it stood. The train steamed along the outer face of the mountain now, the rails beneath us supported by iron struts. Plumes of darker smoke rose from beyond the bend ahead, but the source was not yet visible. Then I heard it. A far-off wailing, the sound of sirens like a mother keening for her lost children. I thought of the train I had heard before coming to Alteran, and wondered if I was somehow now riding inside the very locomotive I had heard back then. But how could that be? We saw the cause of the commotion as we rounded the bend. A cloying fume hung over the city, and what I thought at first were towers showed themselves to be, instead, the barrels of great guns, all facing anxiously to the south. Zeppelins hovered in the air overhead, but many were aflame, and still others floundered in the skies like dreadnoughts sinking into the crushing deep. We were fast approaching a juncture in the tracks. One branch led back around to the lip of the volcano and then off to the north, towards the Reach and the lands beyond, while the other led straight into the capital. A gasp spread through the cabin as we saw the guns going off, heard their thunderous report and the ensuing echo off the far side of the caldera. These sonic ricochets rattled the train like a crack of distant lightning. Gunfire played across the gloom overhead, like fireflies dancing over a field of ash. I heard attendants shouting at one another but couldn't make out their words. The train lurched, and I saw we were now running parallel to the city. The decision had been made. No stop would be made here. The train gained speed, instead of slowing, shooting like a rocket along the side of the caldera, gently rising up as we traversed its circumference before descending back down the mountain's other side. I put my fingers to the cold glass and watched the capital fade behind streamers of fog. Elena's composure broke entirely. She clutched Walaj's hand so firmly that he winced. I could see the worries flashing behind her eyes. If Sevgorod was burning, her home in Rostova would surely be next. I saw the unspoken struggle plain on her face. Could she help by going there? No, she was just a little girl. What could she do? Would her father be safe? Would anyone be safe? Was this the end of the world? "Don't let go," she said to him again and again as we sped through indifferent night. "Don't let go." We wound northward like a needle threaded through ice and pine, moving beyond the reach and Elena's former home, which, for the time being, remained untouched, though thick clouds hung overhead that seemed to foretell an approaching storm. I had discovered that the veil between imagination and reality was thinner in the second world through and through, although it maintained an uncomfortable congruence with the world I had once known, much as our dreams seemed to travel along tracks laid down in our waking hours. We all carry our past with us in our imagination, and in that place most of all. Through the windows we watched the now crumbling castle of Skalliheim appear in the morning fog, its central keep jutting out from the side of the mountain like a blackened finger pointed toward the worlds below. As we passed that ancient structure, Elwain peered at its outline, set against a jagged line of pine trees, and his eyes seemed to shatter into 1,000 pieces, though he said nothing. Elena, who had fallen into a fitful slumber, let out a yelp. Several of those nearby gave her scornful glances, but she paid them no mind. "Elwain," she said, after her eyes fluttered open. At first, she seemed reticent to say anything at all, and I wondered if this was the first time I had seen her shamed, although by what I could not say. "I had another one of those dreams." He removed his gaze from the shadows into which Skalliheim had vanished, replaced only with the matte black of moonless night. "Tell me," he said. "Well, it was like this," she began, pleased to have our attention once again. Canals cut across the free city, following no apparent plan, instead swerving to one side and then another. Boats bobbed in these waters, some of them sidling right up to open porches where they would sell a household its evening meal and then move on to the next. Elena had a porch like this outside her bedroom, paved with diamond-shaped stones and bordered by a fence overflowing with ivy. She used to spend many of her afternoons basking in the sunlight or slumping beside one of the statues that stood at the corners, wishing one of those boats would contain a handsome boy. More often than not, it would be a wizened, pot-bellied merchant, but the buns were always hot, steamed and then fried golden, and she didn't mind being alone nearly as much as she pretended, especially at her home, which she loved more than anywhere in the world. It had been in the family for several generations. How many was never entirely clear. Sometimes when her father told the story, it had come into their possession when his father was anointed as a regional lord. Other times, it had been in the generation before, after the insurgents had been quelled in the southlands of Duvik. She wasn't basking now. It was night, a crisp, clear night under a bright moon, and the leaves looked maroon under its gentle light, swaying all around her room, adorned in the palette of blue, yellow, and white that was common in the city. She'd just awakened in her bed from a frightful dream in which she was whisked across the countryside by a curiously friendly ex-terrorist and enemy of the state. The room seemed vast and cold around her, and only then did she notice what had awakened her. The blinds flapped in a gust, whipping off the surface of the nearby lake. The trees outside quivered and swayed, groaning in the wind, and she felt suddenly afraid. She called out for her father, but there came no reply. As she had when she was still a child, she ran down the hall and slipped into her father's bed, under thick down covers. She slithered along the bed on her belly, as she used to, and popped out the top amidst a mountain of pillows. Her father's sleeping form was still and facing away from her. She nudged him in the side, but he didn't respond. When she rolled him over, she found his eyes staring blankly at the honeycomb-patterned canopy overhead. Horror shot through her like a jet of ice water. Her father was dead. But then she heard it, the whistling of air escaping his lips. He still lived. She waved a hand before his face, poked his cheek, even bit a finger, but he continued to stare off, alive but lost in himself. His breath was labored, slight droplets of sweat beaded on his brow, but otherwise he appeared alive and well. She peered into his gaping mouth, and it was then that she started to hear the buzzing of insect wings and saw the fluttering of hooked legs clawing their way up and out. With a shriek, she leapt to her feet and ran to the window and looked out at the city beyond. All the lights were out, the entire city trapped in sleep, drifting off to oblivion, their bodies a mere chrysalis for the transformation that was about to occur. Elena fell into a long silence after Elena spoke. The rest of us had little cheer of our own. The entire cabin seemed in shock from all we had endured and all we feared enduring in the days to come. The dreams and nightmares of the past were awakening. She sought her vengeance and would not rest until she claimed every mind within the second world, though for what purpose, no one could any longer recall. On the third day of our railway journey, snow began falling, whitening the pastures and far-off forests around us. We were now in the open stretch of hills and fields that lay well beyond Sevgorod. Not long after the brightening of morning, we came to an unexpected halt. Many voices began speaking at once, and soldiers wandered up and down the aisles trying to quell concern, though of course this only provoked it further. I heard them say that a tree was down on the tracks somewhere up ahead and needed to be removed. Others said we would be moving soon, but there was a quiet anxiety in the cabin, an unspoken fear, placed so far out of mind that the thought is made conspicuous by its absence. A soldier put his gloved hand on the shoulder of a woman who was peering into the fast-falling snow. Her daughter stood on the bench beside them and started slapping the seat cover in excitement. "Look!" she cried in a high-pitched and almost musical voice. "Look, Mommy! Why are the furry men running around out there? Aren't they cold?" she asked. "Huh?" The soldier leaned forward, squinting out the window. His eyes went wide in shock, but I couldn't see the cause for his alarm. The window shattered and something burst through. Before I even knew what it was, I could tell that it radiated an awful power. At first I thought it might be a great wolf, but quickly saw this was not so. Though it stood upright like a man, it had a muzzle and fangs and horns cresting its head like a goat, and eyes like those of a goat as well, square-shaped and horrible. This beast landed heavily on top of the soldier with a sound like snapping twigs and rolled to its feet. The man was a broken doll, his neck and back twisted unnaturally in several places. "Tovag!" the soldiers yelled as all of them wheeled around and fired their guns wildly, the deafening sound reaching my ears just before the cloying scent of gunpowder hit me. There were groans and shouts throughout the cabin, and several passengers fell to the floor, clutching their sides. Blood pelted the floor behind the Tovag leader. A momentary autumn downpour as bullets pierced the creature's woolly side, but its face registered annoyance rather than pain. It grabbed a soldier and lifted him, the man's feet scrambling to find ground that was no longer there. He was dead before he landed. Meanwhile, more of the Tovag burst through windows, now 5 in all. Wallaj stood in front of us, unsure what to do, but willing to put his body between us and danger without a thought. Elena shouted, "Stop!" And he ripped the mask from his face, revealing his Chitilian features to all around. Sure enough, all the Tovag froze, like deer in a clearing who had heard a strange sound. They seemed in awe of their own deference to this anomaly. "Who is this now?" one asked the others in broken Chilean. "I find I don't want to kill this one so much." "He smells strange," another observed. "I'm Chitilian cousins," Elwain said. They regarded one another skeptically. "Can't be," one said. "Pure blood's all gone," said the other. He didn't say it like it was a compliment. "Not this one," Elwain said, ignoring the slight. Even in the elder days, the Tovag often considered their cousins to the south overly contemplative, weak and indolent, and made no secret of it. "I've come to speak with One Eye." He said something after this in their tongue, which I did not then speak. They all burst out laughing. Just then, the door at the end of the cabin snapped open like a rifle shot. The lead Tovag didn't startle or hesitate. He leapt and landed before the soldier who stood quaking in the doorway, the trigger suddenly impossibly heavy under the man's finger. You could clearly see his last thought register in his eyes, that this had been an imprudent course of action. There was a wet sound. His body dropped like a sack of potatoes and didn't move again. When the Tovag turned back to us, he held the man's head in his blood-stained hand. "Want to see One Eye, you do?" he asked the severed head, and paused as if he expected a reply. It still wore that calm look of realization, frozen there now until the worms took it. Then the Tovag shrugged and casually tossed the head over his shoulder. It landed in the lap of a passenger who was too terrified to do anything but stare back at it. Pushing past Walaj as if he wasn't there, this Tovag grabbed me up in one hand and Elena in the other. Nisa climbed atop the seat and bared her pointed teeth. A Tovag snatched her off her feet and held her with an expression of bemusement as she kicked and snapped. The other passengers had by this time already made to flee into other cabins, but the marauders seemed uninterested in giving pursuit or harming them further. "We'll come willingly," Elwain said. "Let them go." The leader shook his massive head. "Can't move like Tovag. We carry." Elwain scowled, and the Tovag put out his hands in a symbol of peace. "Carry? Nice? Fine. Harm no more Chernayans this day," Elwain said, and he climbed up onto the Tovag's broad back. The beastmen looked down at the twisted bodies at their feet, and then at each other. One of them said, "Only here to scare a little. Job done?" Another picked up one of the fallen soldiers and hurled him through an unbroken window. The few remaining passengers screamed and scattered. The Tovag laughed again heartily. "Come!" Together we were off into the blizzard, headed towards those furthest reaches where Chernayans still feared to go.
That's all for this week's episode. Stay up to date with upcoming episodes by subscribing at fallencycle.podbean.com or wherever you prefer to listen to your podcasts. Check out the work of the contributing musicians. Those links and additional information is available in the text provided along with this episode. This audio edition was produced by James Kershaw, along with text-to-speech synthesis. A statement on the use of LLMs is available on our website for those curious about how we do and don't use these technologies. This podcast is Creative Commons 3.0, Attribution, Share and Share alike, non-commercial use.